Welcome to Bottle Rocket with Elena Sucheva, your top hockey podcast. Welcome to Bottle Rocket. I'm Elena, joined today by Stan and Jerry, and our guest today is Neil Smith, one of the most significant figures in modern hockey history and the architect of the 1994 New York Rangers, who broke a 54-year Stanley Cup drought. Neil, great to have you with us.
Great to be here. Thank you very much.
I have a question for you right off the bat, Neil. You're growing up in Toronto, you're a kid, and you're playing hockey. At what point in your life did you decide you wanted to have a career in the hockey business? What was the turning point?
Well, I think, Stan, not to get too, too personal, but I think the turning point was when my father died when I was 10 years old, and my mother, who was a fanatical hockey player in her own right in the 30s in Winnipeg. And she showed me this great interest that she had in hockey. So having one parent, hockey became everything to me because it was everything to her. And so it was at that point that I never stopped. I just wanted to try to play in the NHL and do anything I could. But in those days, of course, it seemed like such a pipe dream to ever think you could play in the NHL. And for me, it actually ended up being one because I never did play in the NHL, but I wanted to be in hockey. I think mostly because I knew my mother would be very proud and that would be a great bond that we'd have together.
You earned your nickname Big Deal Neil because you weren't afraid to swing big with trades. In today's salary cap in NHL, that style almost doesn't really exist anymore. Do you think hockey was better in the era of blockbuster trades, or is it just the reality of modern team building? What do you think?
Well, I still think there's big trades today. Like we just had one with Quinn Hughes going from Vancouver the other day over to Minnesota, but they're for different reasons than they were in my time. And the big trades or any of the trades were just to improve your team in one way or another, either for the future or for the present. And you could make big deals because you didn't have the salary cap. And so they were just based upon players and the ability players had, which why we have that expression that I think came from Sam Pollock that said, the guy who gets the best player won the deal, won the trade. That's not the case anymore, because there's so many reasons why teams trade players, financial reasons, salary cap issues, and so on, which we just saw with Quinn Hughes, which I might add, Stan, one of the most fascinating parts of that trade to me was his Steve Bouillon, whose background is from Israel, his parents. I find that story just an amazing story. I mean, I thought it was interesting that the person that wears your jersey, Alina, that came from Scottsdale, Arizona. I thought that was amazing. How did you ever learn to play hockey that well from Scottsdale? But this young boy or young man now, his parents immigrated from Israel, and he fell in love with hockey and ends up being not just an NHL player, but it looks like he's going to be a very, very good NHL player now for Vancouver.
Absolutely. Neil, you can tell I'm a Canucks fan, so
which is great.
I'm still grieving from the 1994 final. I haven't quite gotten over it. In my nightmares, I still hear Lafayette hits the crossbar. So I'd kind of like to go into the weeds a little bit here. You played hockey at Western Michigan University for 4 years. From what I can tell, there's not a lot of information on the internet about this, but you were more than a point-a-game player on defense for a not very good team. Is that? Can you discuss your career at Western Michigan?
Well, yeah, and thank you for bringing it up. I mean, I started there in 1974, which was the first year of the arena. They had just built the Lawson Ice Arena. Harry Lawson was the original coach of Western Michigan University. And so I got there and I had a number of good years, but I guess the thing I'm most proud of now, and it took me until I was this age to realize this, Western Michigan won the NCAA this year for the first time ever in their 50th year of Division One play. They won the NCAA. And I started to realize that I was the captain and played in the very first Western Michigan Division One game, and I was the captain of the team way back 50 years ago. So that was
Oh,
sort of startling to me. But I was an offensive defenseman. I would have been a much better player in today's game than I was in the 70s when you had to, watch you didn't get your teeth knocked out at any minute. In those days, I was more. I was a fairly good offensive defenseman. Back in those days, there was a guy named Ron Wilson who became the coach of many of the teams, Washington Capitals, Toronto Maple Leafs, and others, who was the best offensive defenseman in hockey. Ended up having a little bit of time in the NHL as a player. But that was the days, though, Jerry, of you were trying to be Bobby Orr. Everybody that played defense that had some wanted to be Bobby Orr. I wore number 4 at Western because of Bobby Orr. And so I was that was probably the highlight of my playing days, was playing at Western Michigan and doing pretty well there.
Wait a minute. You're telling us that you were the captain of the team. You were good. My thinking is, where was your agent, or what was the next step? How come you didn't make a step after college the way these guys do now? What happened?
Well, first of all, the college players weren't very well liked back in those days. Like they all wanted major junior players. They didn't want Europeans. They didn't want college guys. Were not guys that could play in the NHL. I was drafted by the Islanders, as you know. My friend Jimmy Devillano helped with that, drafting me for the Islanders. I got to training camp in 1978, and of course was just in awe of being on the same ice with Potvin and Gillies and Bossy and Trottier and just was overwhelmed by that, and Tonelli and the rest of them. In fact, it was Tonelli's first year because we were friends from Toronto. But I just wasn't cut out to be a good pro player, and especially not an NHL player. I played a couple of years in the minors, and then my mother talked me into hanging it up because I had to get into the real world, she said.
Jerry mentioning the Canucks brought me right back to growing up in Russia. Pavel Bure was my guy before Ovechkin. Wayne Gretzky has hinted over the years that if the Rangers had landed another elite scorer like Pavel Bure, he might have played longer. You tried to acquire him in 1999, right? To pair with Wayne. What actually happened between you and Brian Burke at that deadline?
Well, Brian wanted to get all the young players he could. That's what his aim was, and um, he wanted to get all of our best young guys, which we were not long on young guys because we traded a lot of them to win the cup in '94. So I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to trade all the young guys have no future just so that we'd have a decent, maybe a better shot that year of playing. So it was. Gretz, I've heard that before. I never heard it from him, but I've heard it from other people. But you know what? There's only so much you can do when you're in these jobs. You're supposed to make sure that your team is good in the long run and stays competitive. And you really can't be just thinking about today only, unless you're in that window to try to win the cup. But yeah, I don't know that he would have stayed. He only got 9 goals that last year he played, so I think he had, he'd had enough of that, and it was time for him.
A lot of people compare Connor McDavid to speed, to Bure's speed. Haven't watched Bure from the GM's box. Do you think this comparison is fair, or was Pavel Bure's explosiveness in a category of its own?
I think he was a player of all of his own. He did have explosive speed. He had great skill, but he was also an unbelievable goal scorer. He was a better goal scorer than Connor McDavid because Connor McDavid is so many different things, and not just a goal scorer. But Pavel Bure, I mean, he had incredible speed. He was tough enough to play in that era, but the biggest thing is he could score goals in bushels. So I mean, he was just an amazing player, and we could have had him in Detroit, but the league overruled us taking him that year and said that he didn't have the the credentials to be in the draft that year. And then, of course, Vancouver took him, and the rest is history.
Drafted in the 13th round in 1974. Did you know that the Islanders also picked in that very same draft Clark Gillies, Brian Trottier, Bob Bourne, Dave Langevin, and Stefan Pearson, who were like the building blocks of their 4 Stanley Cups? You know, you're in that class.
I'm right in that class, but I think that they were the building blocks, and I was carrying the tools around for the builder. They were no, they had some great drafts. The Islanders obviously, right from the get-go, did an amazing job on drafting players the whole way through. I remember when Jimmy Devellano and I went to Detroit, and I just told him this the other day, the player. I said, Pat Flatley, you were the last guy that the Islanders took before Jimmy D left to go to Detroit. That was 1982. And for Detroit that year, Murray Craven and I forget who the other one was, had been taken. Gerard Gallant got taken by the previous regime as well. But yeah, I was in that class with those guys, but I think I was more of an afterthought than up with those. Those were the big guys for those 4 cups.
Yeah, I don't think I ever told you this, or maybe I did, but a statement you made became part of my personal lexicon to this day. We were sitting together watching the Rangers, and Alexei Kovalev was on way too long, way too long, and you said, that guy doesn't get it. He just doesn't get it. And I've used that expression forever. Do you remember that episode, or would you? It's such a passing thing.
Yeah, no, I remember saying many things about Alex, who, by the way, I loved Alex. I really did. Like, he was like my kid. Like, I loved his skill level. He should have been a way better player in the annals of history than he has been, because he didn't understand the objective of the game. He had more skill than I've ever seen on a guy. Honestly, the most skilled player I've ever seen. But he didn't, like, he had to say to him, Alex, at the end of the game, the number underneath New York needs to be higher than the number under the other team. That's what we're trying to do here. So put the puck in the net and forget all those great moves you make and go in and out in 3 or 4 times and deke a guy 5 times and then go off the ice. Like, score a goal. That's all we really want is goals, because we need that to win hockey games.
Well, he got one against the Devils, which I'll never forget. And that turned the game around late in the second period. What a shot that was.
It did turn the game around. And from what I understand from the other side, the uproar that went through the building when Kovalev scored, meaning the cheering that was from the Ranger fans that were in the building, so upset the players that they were in the locker room right at the end of that period. And there was some arguments broke out and different things were going on that it really threw them off their game. Was the fact that, they were up 2-0, and then Kovalev scores and the building erupts. And, it was like, what's going on here?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll confirm that. I was doing the interviews for the Devils. We were doing the games, and I had Bernie Nichols on. And Bernie Nichols walked in, and I thought he was going to burst into tears. And what he basically said during that interview, without being translated, but what he basically meant was, that goal is going to kill us. And of course, we know what happened after that. But I can never remember doing an interview with a guy with his team leading by a goal at home and feeling as if we're goners. That's what it was. So another interesting point.
Yeah, that is amazing story. That game in itself is a historic game for a lot of different reasons, but mostly because of Mark and his histrionics.
Well, it was such a disaster from our end that I had a fight with my wife over dinner. So there you go. Yeah, I could have laughed now. It wasn't funny. Well, you know, we got crazy, right? We get crazy,
Yeah,
crazy stuff.
Shirley was the best.
Yeah, not that night.
I want to ask about Wayne Gretzky. So you signing Wayne in 1996 was one of the biggest moments in New York hockey history. What's one thing about Wayne as a teammate or as a person that might surprise people who only know the legend?
Well, I guess one of the things, first of all, he was always a great guy. He was always wanting to talk hockey. He didn't want to do anything but talk hockey. He'd often come up to where I sat on the charter flights and talk about things, but he didn't sit with all the players in the back of the plane. So the plane had three sections. It had the section in the front, which was mostly the coaches and the management guys. Then there was a middle section for the media, John Davidson, the broadcasters, and that. And then in the back was all the players, and there was a little buffet back there and stuff. But Wayne, who didn't like flying, used to sit with John Davidson in the media in the middle, and he sat there for the flights, which was sort of unusual. And then he would come up and talk, and he would go back and talk, I'm sure, to the other players. Um, but he was somebody who he loved to talk hockey. That was it, and not necessarily about his hockey or our hockey or anything, but about hockey in general. He just 24/7 he could talk hockey, and of course obviously knew it encyclopedic wise of the game, the history of the game, and everything. He still is, but was back then an amazing guy. And I think I was in awe too of the fact that it was really Wayne Gretzky. Like, I mean, even though he's younger than me, and even though I'd seen him for years coming on, in the Toronto area there in Brampton, still, when he did what he did for the Oilers, I think we were all in awe of this guy, that this was unbelievable. This was the Babe Ruth of hockey. And when there was the opportunity to sign him, I was like a little kid in a candy store.
I never took much interest in the behind the scenes activities of a hockey team until I watched the movie Moneyball, and how general managers. What would a typical day be for you when you were general manager for the Rangers?
I think, and of course, in those days, you got to go back and remember there was no email, there was no internet, so it was a little bit different. So you had to open piles of mail that you would get, look at faxes that you would get, return a lot of phone calls that you would get, and the phone calls were all on your office phone. You didn't have a cell phone, a private cell phone. If you did have one, that wasn't the way that people got a hold of you. That was they got a hold of you still through your assistant outside, and she would let you know who was on the phone. So the day was made up of that. I would go to practice a lot of times up in Rye, New York, talk to the coaches, you know, find out about injuries from the trainers. Then I would also that day talk to the scouts, Larry Plow, who was our assistant GM and also the head of the scouting. I would have many conversations with him about how things are going. I would probably talk to the coach of Binghamton, which was our minor league team, and find out how things are going there. And then I would, decide on my schedule for that week, whether or not I was going on the road with the team, or we had home games, or was I going to go to Binghamton, or what was I going to do that week? What was important that week to do? So it was always a full day when you sat down at your desk at MSG.
So what time did you start and what time would you be finished?
I would probably start at 10, and because I'm a late morning guy, but I would go until we either had a game that night or until I finished what I was doing, which is usually after, say, around 7 or something like that. Um, I was more of those hours of not real early in the morning, but stay as long as I had to stay to get everything done.
You have a very popular podcast, the NHL Wraparound with Vic Moran. How did that get started? How did you develop it? How long did it take you to develop the thing?
Stan, I wanted to do a podcast for quite a while, and I was trying to figure out who could I get to do it with me. And I thought of Brian Trottier and Dennis Potvin and some of the Islander guys that I'm close to, because I thought there would be a great thing there with the old Ranger GM and then one of the Islander stars or one of the Islander people and me. I thought of my friend Barry Mizell from Migrate because he's very, very encyclopedic about hockey and but I could never get anybody interested enough that they wanted to put their foot in the water. And so this is the truth of what happened. I get a call or a text or something from Vic, who was my good friend for years at ESPN. And I would always have fun with him, calling him, criticizing the broadcasters and saying, why do you have this on? Why do you have that on? And we stayed close. We met through John Saunders. And so when Vic let me know that he'd gotten laid off, I called him and I was pissed off. Like I honestly was calling him just to say, like, WTF, like, what's going on? How can they do this to you? Like, this is bull. Like, you've been there for 30 years and da da da. And he said, well, they finally get everybody, they eventually they get to everybody and da da da. And I got off the phone and my wife, Margaret, said to me, why don't you do something with Vic? I mean, you guys get along so well. And, if he's not working, I said, that's a good idea. And I called him and I said, what about if you and I do like a podcast together or do a project? I don't know if I used the word project or podcast, but I was thinking podcast, of which I knew nothing about other than the word. And it was just great timing because he had been laid off. And I don't know why he had the confidence in me that he thought I would be any good at anything, but he did. And we decided to do this and we've learned the business together. And it has been a great partnership. And I got to tell you, like, probably one of the luckiest things that ever came to me was getting him as a partner because he's got a, and I know you know this, Dan, he's got a work ethic second to none. This guy has a passion, never stops, is always on it, always, morning and night is on it. And his skill set is exactly what mine isn't. He has the ability to do the rundowns, to put the show together, to bring up great topics and question lines and things like that. And I know all the people in hockey, so I'm able to get the guests for us. I'm able to ask people to come on, and they usually, they always say yes, they'll come on at some point, and they do. And those relationships have been very good for us to make the podcast better. But I got to say, it's his amazing work ethic. And the other thing is I said to him, I said, Vic, you should have been on this side of the camera all these years, not on the other side, because you're so good at this. You're good at being on behind the microphone. And I said, it's too bad you weren't doing this for a lot longer, but he seems real happy doing it. And I'm more than happy to have him as a partner because, as I said, he is his skill set is amazing, and I'm blown away by his work ethic. It's just his passion is just incredible. I'm very lucky.
You had so many amazing guests on your show. Who was the most fascinating to interview?
I think I'm going to surprise you because it was really the people that were non-hockey. We had Dr. Lippy Roy on, who is a addiction specialist, who talked about we were talking about gambling in sports and how addiction gets into that. I found that really interesting. We had Bobby Valentine on, who the great manager of many teams, including the Mets. Who was just a character, a just amazing guy. His life has been just amazing. And we've had a lot of others on that aren't necessarily GMs or players or ex-players, but they've been really good. Scott Stevens was on our Hall of Fame edition. Scott was excellent. He was really good. And Scott doesn't come across with that kind of personality when you talk to him normally. And yet on this, he was just tremendous, going back to talking about his whole career, right from all the way from junior hockey right up through till the end. Fascinating guy. And of course, a great Hall of Fame player. So there's been a lot of guys that have been interesting. We had Chris Chelios do one from his car. sitting in Chicago, having the police tell him to move along, move along. That was a funny one. So there's been a lot of great people on, and Stan's been on with us, and he was fascinating. Of course, he's always fascinating. But we've had Sam Rosen on, we've had Howie Rose on, we've had a lot of different people. Again, I'll say it because I really mean it. I've just been lucky that everybody says yes, and that they come on and they share their stories, and that's what's made it really fun to do.
Whom you haven't interviewed yet, but really want to?
I think Gary Bettman, and I haven't asked him yet, but I want to have him on. And Bill Daly told me that he was sure that Gary would do it if I wanted him. Bill Daly himself was on. I just haven't asked Gary yet because the timing hasn't been right. I didn't think that, you want to grab a guest in the right time. I think there's been, Mario Lemieux honestly turned me down because he doesn't like to be in the public, and he apologized, and that he would have been great to have on to talk to, because I know him all the way from Laval when he played there and before his NHL days. We've had quite a few. There'd be some. I mean, I would love to have presidents of Barack Obama or somebody on this show, but I don't think that's going to happen. But we've had some terrific guests.
I think February actually marks the anniversary of Gary Bettman taking over as commissioner, right, Maeve?
First, this guy has the longest term in history of any commissioner.
And
Go
imagine,
after him. Go after him.
Stan, when he came into the league in 1992, 93, that season, and he was coming from the NBA, and of course he was following that short time of Gil Stein, who was sort of put in there in between John Ziegler and Gary. And when Gary came in, and you would never imagine back when he was handing the Stanley Cup to the Montreal Canadiens in 1993 at the Forum, that in 2025 he would be handing the Stanley Cup to whoever it will, in 2026 rather, whoever it will be in 2026. It just is unthinkable that he would be the commissioner longer than the great Clarence Campbell or others. But he has done a remarkable job for his owners. His bosses are the 32 owners, and I don't know that anybody could have possibly done a better job for those owners and making franchise values go up and increasing revenue the way that Gary and his regime has done. It's really been remarkable.
To ask you about your relationship with Mike Keenan. What was he like to deal with on a day-to-day basis?
It was terrible. It was awful. He was. I knew Mike for years, and still know, still to this day, obviously, and knew him before when he was GM of Chicago and coaching around the league and that. But when you work with Mike, it's a totally different guy than when you just know him from afar. He was the most insubordinate person I've ever worked with. He was condescending. He was just not fun to be around for me, for his boss, and would do things without ever asking you or anything, just go off and do things. And then, of course, I didn't mind any of that. What really got to me was what went on in the playoffs when I was asking, I said, do you really think he's trying to screw this up by the way he was handling the players in the New Jersey series earlier than the game that we just talked about, when he was benching Leach and pulled Richter and benched guys, and you wondered what was going on. But I wasn't alone in my distaste for working with Mike. There's been a plethora of people that haven't enjoyed working with him because he's so, he was so erratic. You just didn't know what to expect from him from day to day. It was honestly like every day you wondered, okay, what are we going to be facing today? What's today's thing?
Neil, let me preface this by saying that my maven theory is no team will ever win 3 straight Stanley Cups because of attrition. So I would like to know which team you think is going to win the Cup next June?
Colorado Avalanche. Without any hesitation, I think they're going to win. Unless they face some awful injuries, I hope they don't, for their sake. But they're so well put together, and Florida, as much as I really like those guys, Paul Maurice is a great guy, and I think that Bill Zito is I mean, he's done an amazing job, and I love Marchand and his second life in Florida. The Kachuk brothers, I mean, Matthew in Florida has changed that whole franchise, I think, when he got there. Sam Bennett is quite a player, and of course, Paul Reinhardt's son, Sam, and I know Paul, so is quite a player, and along with Bobrovsky and everybody else you could mention, they're a great team. I don't know that they can get healthy and get it together enough to be able to pull off what they've pulled off the last 3 years in a row, going to the final. I don't think Edmonton is going to win. I just don't. I just don't see them being able to stitch it all together. They're so fragmented, they seem like at times. So I do see Colorado just being absolutely incredible. They remind me of them in 22 when they were that good back in 22 and went all the way. And I think that's going to happen again.
Do they have the goaltending?
You know, it's interesting that you say that. I think they do. I don't think they have star goaltending. I think that they have the two Woods, Blackwood and Wedgwood, and I think that can be enough for them, because I think that teams win the Stanley Cup nowadays without superstar goaltending. It's not like our days, Stan, when I used to say, like, you've got to have a Marty Brodeur, you have to have a Mike Richter, you have to have a Patrick Waugh, you have to have one of these guys that can get you there. And Detroit won it with three different goaltenders. I think when they won their cups, Dominic Hasek was one of them, and I think Osgood won it 1 year with them. But anyways, it was different guys. I think today's goaltending, you can win with a good goalie, but not a superstar. Like a Logan Thompson does a great job for the Washington Capitals, but he's certainly not Marty Brodeur or anything like that. So I think that you can win with Wedgwood and Blackwood, and then you combine that with Makar and McKinnon and Nikushkin, and I mean, it's an amazing team. Neckish, you can't forget Neckish. So yeah, I think they can win with that goaltending.
What do you think of Golden Knights?
I like them, but they seem to be losing guys left and right. They get guys injured, and they're never completely a full team together all at once. I think that they've got the personnel. I mean, Eichel, I didn't know Eichel was this good. When he was in Buffalo, you couldn't see it. And suddenly he's gone to Vegas and been the player that everybody maybe thought that he was going to be for Buffalo, but couldn't get there, maybe because Buffalo didn't have a good enough team for him to be as good as he is today. Mitch Marner's a terrific player. Stone is a great captain, but they do get banged up a lot, that team. And I don't know that they have the depth to be able to get all the way this year.
And how about Dallas Stars?
I like Dallas a lot. Something seems to always go wrong in Dallas. So at the end, right, they seem to always have, a perennial contender, but never like always a bridesmaid, never a bride for some reason. And this year doesn't seem to be much different. I mean, when you watch the games on a nightly basis and you predict who do you think is going to win that night, and so many times you go, oh, Dallas, I thought for sure they would win that game, and they didn't. So I don't know. I think they're a real good team, and it could be that they knock out Colorado again. That could very much happen. Anything can happen in the league. But I do like Dallas. I think they're a very strong team. I'm disappointed in Winnipeg, because I thought Winnipeg would be better again this year than they are, and I don't know if it's the loss of Ehlers that left and went to Carolina, if that has slowed their team down or what's happened there. They were losing. They did lose Hellebuck for a stretch, and he came back and they started to win, but they're not the same team as we've seen for the last couple of years.
I want to talk
Yeah,
about the Leafs. Yeah, not to be mentioned in the same sentence with the Stanley Cup, but yeah, in crisis state right now. They sit at the bottom of the Eastern Conference, and there's a disconnect with Berube's system, and the core stars like Matthews, Nylander are struggling to produce. From your perspective as a GM, how do we even start to begin to fix things? What would you do? What trades?
I can't really say what trades I would make, Lena, but I can tell you that there is a disconnect with the coaching staff to the players for sure. I mean, and I don't, I'm not in the room. I'm not even in that building, but I can see it that the players are not responding to this coach. They're not playing a system to win, and they were last year and the year before. They were getting 100-point seasons, and suddenly they lose Mitch Marner, and now all of a sudden they're a totally different team. I do know they've had other injuries. An important defenseman, Tanev, has been out for them for quite a while. Their top goalie, Stolars, has been out for quite a while. But the other guys, Hildeby and Wall, have done a good job for them. They're just not. They're not all clicking together. They're not playing together as a team, and there's no system that you can see that is happening for them. The guy that I really admire in Toronto, you didn't mention him, but I will. Is Tavares, because Tavares has been the ultimate pro in my mind. He has gone to Toronto, was captain. They took the C away to give it to Matthews, which was a logical thing of moving it along to the next guy up, and but Tavares did that in stride. He never said a bad word. He worked his butt off all the time. And this year he works his butt off again. He's a great example to the young players. I think he is just terrific. In my mind, I mean, I just love the way this guy plays and his attitude and the way he carries himself. So he's definitely not one of the problems, but I don't see that this coach, and I'm not down on Craig Berube. I have nothing bad to say about Craig. I don't care who the coach is, if it's Joe Blow, they're not responding. The players are not buying into what they need to buy into to win. And eventually that's going to fall on the coach.
Do you think firing the assistant coach and replacing him with Steve Sullivan is going to fix the problem?
No, I don't. I don't know what went into that. That's a whole different, that's another era change from our time because, I mean, I said to Vic the other day, I said, like, what are we, football now that we've got a different coach for each different skill set? Like, ultimately, the power play falls on the head coach, right? I mean, I had Roger Nielsen, Hall of Fame coach. His power plays were great, and I don't remember him ever assigning that to Colin Campbell or Dan Maloney or any of the others. It was like we all work on everything. And now it seems like, well, there's two assistant coaches. One handles the defense and the other one handles the power play. So you got the penalty killers being handled by one coach. And what about the head coach? What's he handling? So I don't get that. I know that I saw what Brad Treliving said, that Mark's responsibility was the power play, and the power play was abominable. So they were making a move to change that, and I get that if that's the way you do things. The other thing is, I've never seen an assistant coach fired in the middle of the season. It's usually it's the head coach that brings in the assistant coaches, and it's his decision at the end of the year whether or not he continues with them or he wants to change one of them. But this seemed like management, and I don't know this for sure, but it seemed like management jumping in and cherry picking a coach and saying, okay, you're gone. The power play's no good. You're gone. So I don't think that's going to change everything, though. I just don't think it works that way.
I think it becomes more obvious how much value Mitch Marner brought to the team, and a lot of fans underestimated that.
I think the fans, uh, the fans should be woefully sorry if they were picking on Mitch the last couple of years because he was a hometown guy and they expected more out of him. I think they know now that he was a great player. I do think also that it's curious because Mitch Marner's from Toronto, got the dream come true, played for the London Knights, drafted by the Toronto Maple Leafs, got to Toronto, made the team, became a star. I mean, what more could you have when you do that in front of your own family and friends? And yet he wanted to leave. And, John Tavares, just to point him out again, is the opposite. He's from Toronto, drafted by the Islanders, had a great run with the Islanders, but wanted to get to the Leafs, gets to the Leafs and doesn't want to go anywhere else. He wants to stay with the Toronto Maple Leafs, his team that he grew up cheering for and that his family and friends are around. So it's curious with Mitch and that whole thing. But if the Leaf fans didn't realize what they had, they probably do now.
What do you think of Minnesota's chances now that because they were a good team before the trade, and they gave up 3 good young players off of their roster, but since the trade, their chances off the rush have gone up by 50%, and their offensive zone time has improved. So, what do you think of Minnesota's chances?
I think they're great. I think they're going to have a good chance to really do some damage in the playoffs. I don't think they're up with the likes of the teams that we've already talked about, but I do think that with Quinn Hughes, you get a Quinn Hughes or a Hudson, or even this kid the Islanders have, Matthew Schaefer, what he'll be like in a couple of years. You get, and I can go back to the old time guys, the Brian Leaches, the Ray Borks, and all that, but you get that quarterback back there, Nicholas Lidstrom, and boy, that changes the whole dynamic of your team because these guys can do things from back there that nobody else can do, and the way they see the game and the way they can organize an offensive rush. So I do think that he's going to give them a much better chance of doing damage in the playoffs, meaning that who knows, they can get as far as they can get carried. I think that their goaltending seems to be good enough with Gustafson, is a good goaltender. So they've got that incredible contract for Kaprizov, which I still can't believe they paid $17 million a year for a winger. But nevertheless, he's played well since they gave him the contract. He hasn't slowed down. So we'll see.
Neil, I got to go back to the Tavares thing because, unlike you, I'm not a fan of Tavares. And the reason why I'm not a fan of Tavares is that he should have let Lou Lamoriello know that he wanted to go to Toronto and given the Islanders an opportunity to make a deal. And I feel that was a terrible, terrible thing that he did. And I told him that in an interview later. And I can't say, so he goes to Toronto, and they're supposed to win the cup with this guy with all the other stars. And he was a captain of the Islanders, but I never thought he was a great captain, and I never thought he was a great player. He was a good player, but way overpaid. And I've said every season, I said, Leafs are never going to win the cup with this guy.
Well, so far you're dead right. That's for sure. And I don't think they're ever going to win the cup with him either. I just, and I know all that Islander backstory that Lou came in right after, remind me, the backup goalie again, that was the GM.
Garth Snow.
Garth Snow, they should have had him signed the year before, right, Stan? I mean, we know that they should have made sure they got him signed, and they weren't able to do that for whatever reason. And they should have then, if they couldn't do that, they should have traded him and got what they could get. It's unconscionable that a first overall pick and a player of his stature and the captain and the rest could get out of there for free, walk away. And I get that from the Islanders standpoint. After all, I go to every Islander game at UBS Arena, and when Toronto is in there, that's the only time you really hear the Islander fans because they boo like crazy when Tavares touches the puck. But I just what I was trying to say was I admire the work ethic of a guy who was brought in. Yes, he was overpaid for sure. They didn't really need him when they brought him in either. I don't think that Dubas was a smart signing when they brought him in there. But I do admire the way he has transitioned from being the captain to a lesser role, and yet working just as hard and trying to lead by example. And that's really where I was at with that comment.
One thing about you that I did not know, that really surprised me in doing my research, was that you own the Johnstown Chiefs, which
Yeah.
is of Slapshot fame. So can you tell us that story?
Yeah, that's a great story. That's what happened was I was involved a little bit in the ECHL, a touch, and there was a guy named Rick Adams who was a commissioner, and he called me and said that the family that owned the Johnstown team wanted to sell it, and basically for the debt that they had, and right away it hit me that this was the iconic team from Slapshot. And I'd played in Johnstown against Johnstown way back in the 70s. At that time, they were called the Johnstown Red Wings because the Red Wings were their parent team or something. And so I said, yeah. And we got involved in it and got the team. And then I kept it for a number of years, although I didn't go there very often, but we had it, we owned it. And I ended up coaching the team the last half of the last season because the manager there wanted to fire the coach. I said, well, I'm not paying another guy to coach. I said, and paying this guy off too. So I said, I'll come and coach. And so I went there and coached, and we ended up making a lot of deals to make Greenville a better team because we knew we were going to move the team to Greenville. But the big thing is, Jerry, about the Johnstown team was, in the last game we played in Johnstown, the New York Times came, and we got all kinds of coverage from all over the place that this historic franchise was going to be finished after this game. And I was coaching that. So that's sort of a neat moment for me too, was to do that and to have owned the Chiefs after watching that movie so many times was really fun.
I have to tell you, I saw the Johnstown Bluebirds playing in the Eastern League before World War II when I used to go to the Rover games. Johnstown Bluebirds, great name. And after the war, Johnstown Jets. It was some great hockey. Jets played the New Haven team in one of the great minor league playoffs. So Johnstown had some great history, and you were a part of it. Thing is, you could have fired yourself as coach.
I should have, with my record. If you look up my record, I should have been fired, but I couldn't fire myself.
It would have been great if you could have hired Bruce Boudreau to coach, because he
Yeah.
was in Slapshot.
Yeah, he was in Slapshot as a visiting player in the movie, and yeah.
Celebrini and Bedard, there's already a lot of talk about them. When you strip away the hype, what do you experience hockey people actually look for when they comparing franchise players this early?
It's interesting. I think that there's been a lot of that talking about, who would you rather have, Bedard or Celebrini? And I think that, Bedard came on with such fanfare, and this whole term generational player is kind of unfair because, generational players to me are players like Mario Lemieux and Wayne Gretzky, Eric Lindros when he first came to the league, although it didn't turn out to have a career that was generational. Messier was somewhat of a generational player, but Bedard coming out of Regina, particularly at the size he is, I thought it was a little bit unfair, and going to a team that had nothing in Chicago. So that's been very hard for him. Macklin Celebrini, I think, is a more complete player, meaning that he knows the game a little bit better. He's not just an offensive whiz like Bedard is. I think he knows the game, both ends of the ice, a little bit better. And he's with a team now that's San Jose that's advanced above where Chicago was the last couple of years. And they're above them now, I think, in their development into trying to get back to being a team that's in the playoffs. So I think it's harder for Bedard in where he is. And if you ask me, the question that a lot of people, well, who would you rather have? And that's so hard. You'd be happy with either one, but I do think Celebrini's a bit more of a complete player.
There's a lot of pressure on young stars. Do you think the league doing better job now protecting young stars like Bedard and Celebrini, or are we still asking teenagers to carry franchises way too soon?
I think we are asking him to do things really soon. There's another kid though, I got to tell you, because I see him every game. Matthew Schaefer, the defenseman for the Islanders, is just a terrific player, and is going to be like a Lane Hudson or a Cale Makar or one of these outstanding defensemen in the future that controls the game. I didn't know about him at all before he got to the Islanders, and he missed last season. He only played 17 games in junior. So a lot of us that weren't scouts didn't see him coming the way he is, and he has been terrific for them. He hasn't had too much pressure put on him. I mean, there's pressure, obviously, but he hasn't had that much because he's surrounded by a better team than Celebrini and Bedard. Celebrini and Bedard went to teams that had completely taken the team down to the girders. I mean, they had shredded everything away from those teams, and then they throw an 18-year-old in there and say, here, make us good again, which is really way too much to ask for an 18-year-old to play against men in the NHL and turn teams around. But I do think, obviously, Chicago and San Jose will get turned around at some point. I think San Jose is a little bit further in than Chicago at this point.
Schaefer is in the Met division. I've never seen a division so tight the way it is now. What do you see happening? Who do you think any one of those teams, Rangers, Islanders, Devils, is going to come out better than the others?
Stan, I predicted that the Devils would be better than the other two when we did our preseason shows, and I still think they're better, but they're not playing that way. They're not able to score lately. They've got an interesting game they'll play today. Every game, I wonder, when are they going to get back? You know, when Hughes came back, I thought, okay, now they'll turn the corner, but they didn't. The Rangers are, friendly fire, shot down. They shot down their own airplane, it seems like. So I don't know what to expect out of them. They're just a disaster in my mind. The Islanders are, trying to build the team. Palmieri getting hurt. And then, of course, they got Horvat hurt, who is having just a terrific year. And right now, Sorokin is hurt, although he's going to be back on their road trip, they say. But those guys, they're not deep enough to withstand all those guys being out of the lineup. But I will tell you that the Islanders, with Schaefer bringing in that youthful enthusiasm and optimism, Horvat having a terrific start to the season, goal scoring wise, and Sorokin back to playing the way Sorokin played a couple of years ago, I think has put the Islanders in a position that that people didn't see them going to be in. I think that they're going to be a playoff team. I don't say that for the Rangers, and I do think the Devils should be, but they've got to get it going.
This is kind of a unfair question, and I apologize ahead of time because there's probably no right answer. But in 1994, at the trade deadline, you traded Mike Gartner for Glenn Anderson, and I'm wondering if you have any regrets about that, because to me, basically, they're the same player, and just wondering, like, Mike Gartner never won a Stanley Cup, and Glenn Anderson won 5. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that. And I apologize.
The story on that is that Mike Keenan didn't like Gartner and didn't want to play him and told me, if you don't trade him, I'm not going to play him. And I was like, what? And so I didn't want this guy to have any excuses of why we didn't win because I didn't do this or I didn't do that. So I called Cliff Fletcher and I talked to him about Glenn Anderson, whose contract was expiring at the end of that year. And Gartner had 2 more years to go. So it was a good deal for Toronto in that way. And Mike, of course, being from that area. And so we made the deal. Anderson had to fit right in because he was great friends with Messier, was his roommate on the road in the old days of Edmonton. He fit right in with the other guys. He came through for us. But Jerry, if you ask me if I regret it, I we won the Stanley Cup. So everything went right. When you win the Stanley Cup, you can't regret anything because you won the cup. But on the sake of Mike and Colleen Gartner, I really regret that they weren't part of that, because I really liked them so much. They were such a class act. Um, and if it had been up to me, they would have stayed. And, but I had a coach that didn't like the player, and I didn't want the coach having excuses as to why we didn't win again for 55 years. So I did what I had to do.
What kind of changes in the rules would you like? I know you're not crazy about shootout and stuff, so let's hear it. Let's hear it.
I'm an old school guy, Stan, like you, and I'd like to see 2 points and 0 points. I'd like to see it. If you can have this overtime thing if you want, but if you win in the overtime, you get 2 points, and if you win in, and if you have to have this um, skills competition at the end with the shootout, then you get 2 points or you get none. I don't like this cramming all the teams together because of the loser point. Because every game, what I'm seeing now, and you watch for this when you see the next game, with 5 minutes to go in regulation, teams are playing to get to overtime now. They're not playing to win. They're playing to get to overtime, get that point. And the reason why we brought overtime in the first place was because everybody said, oh, the teams are now playing for a tie. So the last 5 minutes, people are leaving because the game's no good. Well, we've got the same thing now. We've got it back to that again, where teams are playing to get that 1 point. And I know they're doing that because they're saying, like, let's at least get our point out of this to stay up in the standings. So I'd like to see that go away. I hate the penalty for putting the puck over the glass in the defensive zone, because I think it's too harsh of a penalty for something that is not being done on purpose. Obviously, you would never put the puck over the glass knowing it was a penalty. So it's just things happen with a hockey stick and a puck. And to give in a playoff game a 2-minute power play, maybe in overtime, to a team because somebody accidentally put the puck over the glass, I just think is too harsh of a penalty. So those are the things I'd like to see changed. I don't want it to go back to the way it used to be all in anything. I'm not like that, but Stan, you'll love this one. I got to tell this story because I'm so proud of my mom. So she once told me this. I was probably already the manager of the Rangers when she told me this. She said, Neil, when they put the red line in, she said it was to speed up the game. And I said, well, what do you mean to speed up the game? She says, because you couldn't pass it over your own blue line. The puck had to go out of your zone before the players did. And so by putting the red line in, you could pass from behind the net all the way to the red line now instead of just to your own blue line. So it sped the game up. So I didn't even realize that because I wasn't alive then. And I didn't realize that that's why the red line was put in. And so now we've gotten to a point where we've taken the red line out. And of course, you can pass now from behind the net all the way to the far blue line. That's really sped things up. But I just find it really interesting that they put the red line in to speed up the game. There wouldn't be many people that would know that weren't around at that time that would realize that, well, the red line sped the game up. It didn't slow the game down.
I was 10 years old, my friend, when it happened. And it was a Rangers manager, a coach, Frank Boucher. He was the coach at the time. They gave Frank Boucher the rule book, and they told him to streamline the rule book and and he put in. That's when he put in the red line. It was 42-43.
And let me ask you this, because I know you're going to have the answer to this. I have the answer already, but why did the red line go in as a checkered red line? Why was it checkered? And that was a rule.
That was for television purposes.
That's right, because it was black and white TV. And if you put in a solid red line, the viewers wouldn't know which was the red line and which was the blue line.
Right.
So my final question for you, Neil, since we're running out of time here, what would you think about 3 points for a regulation win?
I know that's come up a lot, and a lot of people mention that, and I'd be in favor of anything, I guess, that would get us away from the way it is now, the 1 point. The problem with the 3 point regulation win is now all the records go out the window, right? I mean, they're basically out the window anyway because of the way we do things. But you'd have teams getting 150 point seasons, I guess, or 160 point seasons, because if you got, if you had 50 wins, or let's say you had 40 regulation wins, that's 120 points right there. So
Mhm.
I just want to get it so that we don't have this cramming up and this facade that everybody's so close and that everybody's still in it, which is not even true. But there's a facade that, oh, our team's still in it. We're only 3 points out. Yeah, try making up those 3 points. It's going to take you a long time.
Neil, it's a tradition for the show that I have to close it with a joke. And since it's Christmas week, these are not mine, but maybe it'll get you a smile. This is from Henny Youngman, okay? He said, I love Christmas. I receive a lot of wonderful presents. I can't wait to exchange. And Victor Borg has said, Santa Claus is the right idea. Visit people once a year.
Ain't that the truth?
Okay, so here's the last one. Most people go through 3 Santa Claus stages. First, you believe in Santa Claus. Then you don't believe in Santa Claus. And finally, you are Santa Claus.
That's true.
Thanks for coming, buddy.
Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your insight. Thank you as always, Stan and Jerry. And thank you to everyone for listening. Be sure to subscribe to Bottle Rocket, whatever you get your podcasts, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks, guys. Thanks very much.